Oh, goody.
All right, what's up, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Mercenaries video. This is going to be the return of a Meta Monday. So this isn't something I've done in quite some time. Wanted to, but there was just a lot of different stuff going on in the meta. We got the big drop, and then we got some buffs, and then we got some events, and every time I felt like I could take a look at the stats, we would get a patch, and then the stats wouldn't really mean anything because we didn't get to see how the new patch impacted things. But there has finally been some time to where there's been a little bit of a lull. Things have been kind of settling a bit, and we have some data to look at. So, return of Meta Monday. We're going to be doing it a little bit different this time. So, what I'm going to be doing here is we're going to be taking a look at the comps over on HS Replay, and we're going to be looking at the win rates here, and then we are going to do the graph like I did before to kind of see the general percentage of each comp in the metagame and all that cool stuff. So we're going to dive right on into this one. Before we do, if you enjoy this type of content, do remember to like and subscribe. There's a ton to help out the channel and keeps the Mercenaries videos coming. But yeah, without further ado, let's dive right on into new episode of Meta Monday. So we're going to change from games at the top to win rate at the top, just to get a feel for what is really pulling ahead of the pack right now. And these are games from the top 10%, so 7,700 plus MMR. And the time frame for this is from the last patch, which was the 27th of June. So it's been about 2 weeks or so, which is a pretty good amount of time, and 14,000 games. Our kind of total sample size here. So looking at the top, this actually really surprised me. The highest win rate comps right now are the Frost comps, which is pretty wild, honestly. I did not expect them to perform as well as they've been performing. These comps are the exact same. The only difference here is that the one with like an extra 0.6% wins is the one with the passive for more health and more healing power, and the totem one is just ever so slightly below it. About the same sample size too, a little bit over 300 games. But yeah, the Frost comp's doing really, really well. Pretty standard equipment across the board here for these characters, but this one just using your good Frost units and then having the Tyrandra and Bane combo to close out the end of the game. Personally, I like the Totem variant a little bit more, as it gives Bane or Tyrandra a little bit of protection in the late game, but you could also make an argument for the extra health, also giving you some protection, and sometimes the healing power is relevant for keeping your units alive. But I was really surprised to see this, honestly. I thought this was a good comp, but I did not expect it to be the highest win rate percentage comp that is currently on the parties. So that definitely took me by a little bit of surprise. Moving down here, another one that is performing really, really well, it seems, is the Cho Old Gods Summon build. So it's kind of like a different take on Shadow. Cho using his stash of scrolls to help the minions stay alive longer, N'Zoth for that bit of chip damage, and to summon and blow up your own minions, and then Heart of Y'Shaarj, or Y'Shaarj. I'm actually really surprised that Heart of Y'Shaarj is the equipment on this one. I tried out a summons build recently and found that you could actually get Y'Shaarj's skill 3 online relatively quickly, so I was actually liking item 3 over this one. I think even item 1 is probably better, but surprisingly, this is the one that is at the top, which I'm very much surprised about, though lower sample size, so that is worth keeping in mind. And then just the Shadow bench, really not much to say about that. Vol'jin comes in, speeds up your Shadow stuff, Queen gives you the healing, Sylvanas helps you close out the game. 63.8% win rate, so definitely one of the higher ones. I think anything above or around 60% is a very, very good comp. And then we have traditional Shadow with Cookie. This one was really quite good. I do think the Yogg builds have become a bit more popular, though Yogg hasn't really started to show up on tracking yet. since the event is pretty recent, and this is over the last 2 weeks, so it hasn't been like a whole ton of time to get data on him. But yeah, this one pretty standard stuff here with your Shadow opener, and then you transition into Queen, Sylvanas, and then Cookie just for the extra health. And one cool thing about the Shadow build is if you are expecting a mirror, you can actually just do a triple blue opener, and then you often will be at an advantage versus an opposing Yashiraj. So kind of a cool tech there. That one's coming in at 62.5% win rate, so doing pretty well, unsurprisingly. This comp is one I haven't tried, but seems interesting for sure. Looks to utilize the new Yu'lon buff with Jadefire Spear, so giving that plus 15 health every turn, denying stealth and taunt is pretty good. Kazakus, normal stuff, Yashiraj, so similar opening, but you don't have the speed from Vol'jin available on turn 1, but maybe that's okay in some matchups, as this does seem to be doing pretty well. And then you just have this standard Shadow backline. Nothing really surprising there. Kind of cool to see Yu'lon making it in, though, with the new buff. Always like seeing that. A little bit lower sample size here, though, but still pulling almost 62% win rate. And then our last comp that is just over 60% it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. It is Frost Tyrion with the Pirates. So the Pirates bench has been really, really good still. I've seen different builds with it. The Frost Tyrion build is the one that we actually have stats on, but I've also seen the one that uses Elise and Tyrion and Reno and then buffs them up, and that one seems to be doing probably just as well. It just seems it's not quite as popular amongst players, but this version is great, especially if you do not have new Mercenaries, because it uses all old Mercenaries. These are all Mercenaries basically released well before the last big drop. And that one's pulling 60.4% over 260 games. Look at a few more here, go over them kind of briefly. The Shadow comps, obviously Shadow is really good. You can just kind of put whatever you want in that flex spot. Here we see it has Sinestra over the Cookie. It's really going to depend what you're facing. That determines what the best kind of additional flex spot is. This one was pretty interesting. So the old build that was really popular last meta was the Nefarian Trigore Valera with the Karen Longjin Tyrande bench, and that one is still strong and popular at just under 60% win rate over just under 900 games. But surprisingly, the version that has more games and a slightly higher win rate, ever so slightly, is a version that seeks to drop Valera in favor of Reno, which I thought was pretty interesting. Wouldn't have really thought that would have worked as well as it does, but it seems to be doing pretty well because that is a fairly large sample size. It's one of the larger sample sizes, and we'll see that when we get to the graph here shortly. But yeah, so it's this version with Valera was weaker to Shadow because Shadow can kill Valera on turn 1 most of the time, and sometimes you get the double kill on Nefarian or just good damage on Trigore as well. So I think it had a little bit of a hard time with that, but clearly not that hard of a time, as this comp is still pulling one of the higher win rates, and that is over a pretty large sample size too. So not like kind of surprising actually, given that it's still popular, but I haven't seen a whole ton of it, but it really varies day to day. But then we have the, this is like a big human variant. A little bit different though. This one is using Maestra. So you have Elise to buff up your stuff, Reno to protect, and then you're just using Bane with the totem. You're going to have him be swapping out with Maestra. So that's kind of neat. I played a similar build to this one. However, I had Malfurion on the bench over Rogers. But Rogers seems like a reasonable inclusion. Could be a little scary versus Sylvanas potentially, but Bane is pretty good at dealing with her a lot of the time. This one also coming in pretty high win rate, but also relatively lower sample size. Dragons are also doing pretty well, it seems. This is really the only dragon build that we have good data on, but the Nefarian Yu'lon Longjin open, and this actually uses the spare parts for more sustain, Pearl of Yulon for damage reduction, and Bottle of the Infinite Stars to help your dragons scale up even more. And then has the Sinestra, Cookie, and Alexstrasza bench, which Alex got that buff recently, so her Dragon Queen's Gambit is only 1 cooldown, which has been pretty significant, helping her out quite a bit. This one's also coming in at just below 59% win rate. A little bit smaller sample size there, though, just over 300 games. And then the most popular shadow build in the recent amount of time of this data is the version with Lich King on the bench. I think this version's still pretty solid. I've tried a few different things in its spot, but it's really just relying off that core shadow opener that's giving it most of its power. And it is coming at a 59% or just under 59% win rate over 1,400 games. I think that's pretty good, especially when you consider the fact that Shadow's so popular, you're naturally going to run into mirrors quite a bit, and that is going to bring down the win rate of the comp generally, because you're going to lose with it in the mirror sometimes, and you're going to win with it in the mirror sometimes, but that'll naturally kind of pull it back towards 50%. The fact that it's still pretty high over a large sample size, I think, is looking good for this variant of Shadow. But it's really, I think, the core propping it up rather than the Lich King in specific, though he is pretty solid in the comp. Then the version I was telling you about with the Maestra Bane stuff again, except now Malfurion on the bench. This is the version I kind of prefer. I think it is a little bit harder to play. It has a little bit lower win rate, it seems, but it does have, I believe, a bigger sample size. Yeah, it does. This one had 200. This one's at just under 500, so a little bit bigger sample size. And the sample size does matter quite a bit, because sometimes, especially with the lower sample sizes, the win rate doesn't always give as accurate of a picture. But still, it's probably the best information we have access to currently. Browsing through here, we can see another Cho comp. A lot of these comps have very similar cores. There are a lot of shadow builds. This one is kind of new, and I haven't really seen it very much, but it's the Valera Trigore Grom. Grom finally making another appearance and using Maestra, actually, to swap in, which is pretty interesting. I haven't seen this one myself on ladder. It's also using the Band of Frost and Varden for like fast freeze scaling and Belinda, and it seems like a neat idea. Win rate is just under 55%, but that is over 1,200 games, so clearly it's been being played quite a bit, even though I haven't seen too much of it myself. So that might be one worth trying out. But a lot of the other comps are rather similar. We got more Shadow, we got more Frost. Big Humans on here, a little bit lower than I thought, but I think some of the other big versions are a little bit better right now, especially the Pirate version. The basically this exact opener with the Pirate bench, I think, is performing a bit better than the Big Human bench, which is a shame because I really love the Big Human comp, but clearly it's still playable, just under 53% win rate over 430 games. And then this one really surprised me, seeing the number of games. It's the Frost comp with Karen, Sinestra, Diablo backline. This comp is not good. It's pulling just under 52% over 1,400 games. I have a feeling mirrors are part of the reason for that, but this comp is not good in the current meta, in my opinion, but it is played by bots. It is a very popular bot comp, and because of that, I think that's why the play rate is so high, because I can guarantee you not a lot of regular players are playing this comp, unless maybe you had these mercenaries from playing a while ago and you're just coming back, then I could maybe see it. But without that, I really, really don't see why anyone would be playing this comp. There are just better things to do with Frost if that's the way you want to go. But yeah, that's just general overview of the win rates here. Now we're going to take a look at the graph I put together for the metagame share, for how much these things are actually played. So here we can see all this data is coming from June 27th to July 10th. HS replay data, 7,700 plus MMR generally. And I think we see some pretty interesting stuff. It's a very, I mean, the picture makes it look very diverse, right? Like we have 22 different comps listed here, which is quite a lot. We can see though, and I still can't believe this, that the Varden, Jaina, Localar, Karen, Sinestra, Diablo comp is taking up 12% almost of the meta. That's really, really surprising to me, and I really think that comes down to the fact that bots are using it, and bots are naturally playing more than any average or regular person can play Mercenaries because it's not a human playing. And I'm actually going to do a video talking about the botting issue and whatnot because it is still a fairly big issue, and it's something that I think should be more prioritized and explained for those who maybe haven't heard about it before. I've covered a little bit about that in the past, but that was quite some time ago, so I'm probably going to do a new video on that soon for anyone who is unaware. But if you don't know, some people do cheat in Mercenaries PvP. They let a bot do it for them, and it turns out the Frost comp with the Karen, Sinestra, Diablo bench is one of the easier ones to bot. So for that reason, it's at the top, even though, as we saw with the win rate percentage, it's really not one of the best comps right now, and it does not feel that well positioned versus the meta, but it can still steal some wins. The next one is our Lich King variant of Shadow. So Dasharaj, Kazakus, Bol'Jin, Ashara, Sylvanas, Lich King, all pretty standard equipments. This one is tied for the largest metagame share here at just under 12%. So those two comps together, at least with the data we have here, that's making up almost a quarter of the metagame, which is really, really wild to me. And I don't know, I mean, this is higher percentage too, so that's why I think the botting stuff has a bigger impact on the reason that Frost comp is so played. Because as we saw, it's not the most successful variant of Frost, but it's probably easier for these simple bots to play, and they can just naturally get in a ridiculous amount of games because the MMR system in Mercenaries is very much flawed in its current form. Next is, surprisingly, the Valeera Trigore Grom variant with Varden, Belinda, Maestra on the bench. Again, I haven't ran into this one personally. Maybe I've seen it once, I think, but Grom has really not been around at all when I've been playing. So it really, actually, this surprised me a lot, the fact that this is our third most popular comp, representing just over 10% of the metagame share. Maybe it's gotten more popular in the last few days, as I haven't had quite as much time to play in the last few days. So maybe it's more of a recent thing. But the fact that it's the third most popular over this 2-week period of data really was not something I expected to see. So that's kind of interesting. It might be worth testing out with this comp. Speeding up Varden to scale and freeze stuff was really, really good before Varden got changed. And so maybe this is kind of an attempt at bringing that back, but just using more of the new broken stuff like Trigore and comboing it with Belinda and Maestra, who are just naturally good with him. So that one could be worth looking into. It seems like a pretty solid comp, especially if you enjoy using Grom, because he hasn't really seen play in a little while. Then we have the Nefarian, Trigore, Reno, Karen, Longjin, and Tyrander comp. I think this is the better version of the build. Right below it, you can actually see we have the same exact build with Valeera over Reno. Do have a little bit more win percentage and a little bit more play rate. So that one's coming in at 8%, whereas the Valeera version is coming in at just under 7.5%. So pretty close. Basically, they're almost the same comp. It's just, I think the Reno version doesn't necessarily lose as hard to Shadow, which is important when we realize that not only is Shadow making up this large 12% of the meta, but a lot of these other comps we're going to get to here in a minute are very heavily Shadow-based, just with 1-2 variants, if that. So having good game against Shadow is important. That's why I think this one is coming in with a higher win rate and a higher play rate. Moving on here, we have another Shadow build. I mean, a lot of these are Shadow builds. Like, Shadow and Frost are pretty much like, it's Shadow, it's Frost, and it's Trigore making up like the 3 core pillars. And then I guess there's actually a 4th core you can argue for, which is the big comps that use Elise and Tyrion and often Reno to buff up a big bench. So I think those are kind of our 4 core meta pillars from what we have seen with this data. We have another Shadow comp here, just with Localar on the bench instead of Lich King. That one's coming in at 5.2%, just over 600 games. And we have another Frost build. This is the classic Frost with Varden, Jaina, Localar, Karen, Diablo, Cookie. That one's coming in at 480 games, 4.1% metagame share. Again, I really don't think it is the best Frost comp, and it surprises me that the better, what I think is the best version of the Frost comp and the one with the highest win rate isn't really the one that is seeing the most play. Maybe that will change once people have seen this and they try it out more, but it could also have to do with a variety of factors. Another thing with this one is this is also a popular comp to bot with, like the other version that just has Sinestra over Cookie. I think this is one of the more popular bot ones, so it could be that is propping it up a little bit. Then we have the build Shadow, again, with Cookie over Lich King. I know Frankie really liked this version. He said it was really good. I've also seen Yogg in this slot too, but I haven't really seen much data on Yogg yet, so it's kind of up in the air how good he is in this comp, but he's definitely playable. You can win some games with it. Sometimes he's really good in there. But yeah, that one's coming in also, 480 games, 4.1%. And then we have the Cho version. So we have a Cho minion build. There are 2 of these in the metagame chart. The weird thing to me is this one, the popular one, is actually using Mark of Yasharaj, which is the taunt passive one that gives him attack. And I think that is by far his worst equipment. I really don't think it's worth running over the other 2 equipments. The other 2 are just like way, way better. So it actually really surprised me that this was the most popular build. I mean, yeah, you are spamming the taunt more in this build, but gaining that 5 attack from getting hit really isn't like, it's not doing a whole lot. I think you get much more impact out of skill or item 1 or item 3, depending on which way you're leaning for that build. But that one is also coming in at 480 games, just over 4%. Then we have the big comps, kind of lesser played than I expected relative to some of the more popular stuff, because I run into a lot of these big comps. And basically the ones we're seeing here, it's the Bane version with Maestra that has the Leroy Malfurion in the back and then swaps out Bane for Maestra. I really like this build. Uses the totem on Bane, so you get that totem twice. I think it's a really, really fun build that can beat a lot of different stuff, but you do have to kind of learn how to play it more. I think it's one of the higher skill cap comps because it's not always super straightforward, but it is very fun to play once you learn how to play it. That one's coming in at 450 games, just under 4%. And then the Elise Tyrion Reno with the Rogers Leroy Carriel bench, so big humans. Big Humans is also a ton of fun to play. I've had a lot of success with that comp, and that one is coming in at 430 games with 3.6% of the metagame. And then we have what I think is the superior version of Frost, which is the Varden, Jaina, Localar, Belinda, Tyrandra, Bane. This one is Bane with his totem. That one's coming in at 340 games, just under 3% of the metagame. I think this build is really, really cool, and I think it's the best version of Frost, actually, despite the fact that it has a lower play rate. I really don't think that play rate is indicative of how strong the comp actually is. Then we have let's see here, this is the Nefarian Trigore Mukla, Longjin, Tyrande, Millhouse. So basically you're just swapping out that Reno or that Valera for Mukla. This comp is not good. I think it's like 40% or below win rate. It's just not good. Also has Millhouse on the bench over Karen. Don't play this. I was really surprised that it's even like this represented. It was really, I did not expect to see that there. But it's not good. I would not recommend playing it. It's just a worse version of some of the other comps we've talked about. Then we have the other version of Bane Frost here. So it's literally the exact same comp. Varden, Jaina, Localar, Belinda, Tyrande, Bane. This one just has the extra HP and healing power on the equipment for Bane. Has a little bit lesser percentage, so that one's coming in at 320 games, 2.7%, as opposed to the other one, which had 20 more games and 2 more percent, or 0.2 more percent. So if you combine them together, it's a little bit closer to a bit over 5%, 6%-ish, which, again, that really surprised me because I do think it is the best version of Frost, but maybe it is just a lot of bots playing Frost and not anyone else, or the real Frost players are playing that version. Hard to say, but definitely think that has something to do with it at least. Then looking at some of these last comps here, we have the Dragon comp we showed off. That one's coming in at 2.6%. A lot of these are basically just under 3%, or some at the end here are even under 2%, so a very small portion of the metagame. And some of these are just, as we can see here, just variants of Shadow. This is Shadow with Maestra in the back, so you actually get to swap the Yasharaj out. I don't really like that personally. I think it's better just to get Yasharaj value in the beginning, as he's not really as good in the late game, but it's being played, 2.6% of the metagame. And then we have the kind of weird, different version of Shadow that actually looks to have Yu'lon as a lead, along with Kazakus and Yasharaj, and then just your standard Vol'jin, Queen, Sylvanas bench. I haven't personally ran into this one, but I think it's kind of a neat idea. But again, it's really just solid Shadow core with a little bit of variation, this time in the lead instead of the bench. The Pirate comp, Frost Tyrion with the Pirates is actually much, much lower than I thought it would be, because I think this comp is really quite good. That one's coming in at 2.2%, so really criminally underplayed. And the fact that the big Pirates version didn't even make the cut on the HS replay stats really, really surprises me, because I've seen a fair bit of it while climbing the ladder, and I think it is still one of the more powerful comps in the game right now that is not Shadow or Frost. And we have the Belinda, Trigore, Valeera comp with a Frost bench. I really don't like this comp. I think Belinda leads with Valeera are not as good as they used to be, and I just don't think it is very strong in the current environment. Much more easily counterable than it used to be and whatnot. So that one's coming in 2.2%, so pretty small share. I think you just have better ways to go if you want to be using Trigore and Valeera as your open. Then we have another Shadow build. This one uses Sinestra at the end instead of Lich King or Cookie. It's fine. I don't personally really like this version quite as much. I think Sinestra is a little redundant compared with like things like Sylvanas. She's just not quite as much of an endgame powerhouse as she used to be. And then under 2% here, our last two here, Elise, Bane, Reno, Maestra, Leroy Rogers. So this is the other version of that kind of Maestra totem with Bane, and then kind of buff up the bench. It's a cool comp. I haven't tried out this version with Rogers. I kind of prefer Malfurion for, I think, just having that endgame threat with the double reds, and the sustain is really quite good. However, I could see an argument for this, because with Rogers, you actually have a way to speed up the Bane 10 speed, which is sometimes needed to kill Sylvanas before she can mess you up. So I can see the argument for it there. But Leroy can kind of do the same thing sometimes, much less guaranteed, but it's still possible. So I'd have to test this one, but it is pretty small, 1.7%. And also at 1.7%, our last comp here is it's another variant of the summon comp with Cho, N'Zoth, Yasharaj. This one has the Art of Yasharaj, so I believe that is skill 1, so the one that he steals extra attack. And then just a standard Shadow bench, Ashara, Vol'jin, Sylvanas. I featured a video recently with the Cho summon comp, and I think it's good. It can be hard countered by, most notably, I think the Valeera heavy comps. I think against a lot of the other stuff in the meta, it can do quite fine. So if you're dodging Valeera Trigore stuff, like, you should be pretty good. That one is pretty small percentage. I do think both of the builds featured on here aren't necessarily the best version. I've seen people iterating it with it a bit, and I think the best version is still yet to be fully discovered for the kind of Cho minion comp, but so far the ones that have been more popular and are performing all right are the ones that have the Cho, N'Zoth, Yasharaj lead. So yeah, that is kind of our look at the Mercenaries metagame for Meta Monday. Data paints an interesting picture. It's definitely, I think, where the format has kind of settled for the most part. It remains to be seen. I think Yogg is going to make his way into some builds. I know there's a build that Kapar shared recently, which is a triple old god build. I did one of those too, but he had some really good success climbing to 12k with his version. So I'm probably going to give that a spin. So it's possible the triple old god comp makes its way into the meta in time. Also, another notable exclusion from the data here was the golden monkey comp. I do think that one shows up in the lower percentage range, maybe top 20 or below. But since that comp is kind of open to being hard countered pretty easily by Valera, Trigore, or even just any spell heavy thing, I think the meta is a bit too hostile towards it. It's good as like a counter comp versus some things, but if you're just trying to win against a lot of the different things in the meta, I think that one's going to have a hard time. It's going to have a hard time with Frost too. So looking at all the stuff that is like pillars of the format, it really doesn't have a ton of great matchups. It's really just kind of good against Shadow and maybe some more of like the fringe test builds, but it's a fun comp, but it doesn't seem to be very played or reliable at the top 10%, at least in this last 2-week period. Maybe that'll change in time, but for now, it's looking like we have a pretty consistent group of comps here for the top, basically coming down to Shadow, Frost, big humans, or not even big humans, just big comps, whether it be humans or pirates or some other stuff in between and whatnot. And then the Trigore, Valera, or Trigore and some other stuff, heavy comps. Those seem to be kind of our big 4 pillars of the format right now. Nothing really standing out, I think, as the top deck that nothing else can beat. I think everything has some pros against some matchups, cons against other ones, but we'll have to see how things continue to develop now that Yogg has been recently added. Might change things a little bit, but I don't think it's going to change things a whole lot. I don't think it's going to spawn too many like new comps. Maybe we'll see some more of the triple old gods as more people level their Yoggs, because it's a lot of fun to play and it can win games. But I think that comp might end up going the way of the golden monkey comp, where it's a really good counter versus some things, but it has a hard time with a decent amount of other stuff in the meta. But we'll have to see some more testing and some more data before we can draw any conclusions about that one. But that is going to wrap it up for this episode of Meta Monday. I do hope you found it useful, and if you enjoyed it, you remember to like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.